Hey, I'm making this video to speak about why I left Infosys. So, let me briefly explain a bit about myself. I joined Infosys in 2018 and I left it after working there for 2 years in 2020. I am a SAP sales and distribution consultant. To those of you who don't know what SAP is, let me briefly just explain what SAP is. So, if you think of a company, if you take a company like Maruti, for example, Maruti doesn't directly sell their cars to end customers like you and me. They make cars and they then sell it to these dealers, and people buy cars from those dealers. So, in the manufacturing of a car, Maruti often has to buy a lot of raw products and raw materials from many other vendors. Let's say, for example, in order to build the body or in order to make the engine, they need to buy some steel and metal parts. In order to paint the car, they need to buy paint. And some products like tires and wipers, they don't manufacture themselves, but they just buy it as a finished product directly from other vendors like MRF or Michelin or Bosch. So this process of manufacturing a car and then selling it to a customer, companies use ERPs for or enterprise resource planning softwares in order to run their businesses. And SAP is one such ERP which they use to run their business. There are other ERPs on the market too, like Oracle and Microsoft Dynamics. But SAP is a market leader when it comes to the ERP market segment. So let me briefly also talk about the different types of projects there are and what they involve. So there are four main types of SAP projects in SAP. So the first kind of project is called an implementation. An implementation is where a company currently uses a different system or a non-SAP system in order to run their business. So depending on the size of the company, they might either be using Excel spreadsheets or they might be using another legacy system which has been custom made and custom code has been written for that particular company. This If such a company decides to then implement SAP, such a project where SAP is being implemented for the first time for that company is called an implementation project. And here, what typically happens is that the senior consultants from the systems integrator or the company that is performing the implementation, they need to be able to first not only know the scope and what business processes are involved, but once they thoroughly understand and study and analyze the business process of the company, they need to be able to map that into SAP and provide a solution in SAP for those particular business processes that the company follows. So over here, uh, a certain degree of skills are needed in order to be able to perform these kind of tasks, and one needs to be quite competent both in consulting skills, in business process knowledge, as well as in SAP technical skills to be able to understand and ask the right questions and know what the business process of the company is and what they do, and also to be able to, once that information is available, to be able to provide a solution in SAP without doing a lot of customization, to use as much as possible the SAP standard processes as possible. And only to use customization as a last resort in case there is no standard SAP business process or SAP customization available, SAP standard configuration available. So these kind of projects where SAP consultant would go on site and have blueprint sessions and conduct them with the customer, ask their business process, understand what they do. This is not so easy, and the level of skills required for this are quite high. So this is one type of project and implementation. The second type of project is a support project. In a support project, what happens is that a company that has already implemented SAP uh, needs some systems, some service partner who will resolve day-to-day issues that that company faces in the running of their SAP application. So typically, most tickets are two types of tickets. One are incidents where, let's say that there is some application which has broken, or there is some thing that the user expects that the system should work a certain way, but it doesn't, or there are some errors which need to be resolved. And the second one is change requests, where in the resolution of such a problem, if there are any code fixes or bug fixes that need to be made, or if there are any new the requests for change, where a new report has to be developed from scratch, or a new customization has to be done, or any new enhancement or addition of a new feature or functionality has to be added. So and the scope of work is not that large; it's somewhat small. So such kind of projects where there is an existing SAP implementation already there, and they're just all they're doing is working on tickets and incidents in order to solve those issues. Such projects are called AMS projects, and or support projects. So this is the second type of project. A third type of project is a technical upgrade, and in technical upgrades, what happens is that the customer upgrades their SAP from an older version of SAP to a newer version of SAP. So this also requires a lot of extensive testing, and this also this requires a certain degree of skills too. And the fourth type of project is a rollout. And in a rollout, what happens is that a company that has already implemented SAP for a particular country goes on to implement the same SAP or the same template of processes with to another country. So since these companies tend to follow similar kind of business processes, they often desire that whatever their global template for a process is rolled out exactly that way as much as possible into any other country's rollout. So that's what a rollout is. So these are the four types of projects that there are, and generally at Infosys and other companies like TCS and Wipro, a lot of the projects are these AMS projects, and the kind of work on these AMS projects is very low in scope, very poor. So a lot of the employees who uh, just manage to do just the bare minimum work to stay hired, often after a period of time, they don't have adequate skills and knowledge, and they're technically not that strong. So in Infi as such is a pretty poor place to work in terms of scope of work after a few years. And again at Infi, there isn't that much. The bulk of Infi's work is primarily support and maintenance projects, not just in SAP but in other non-SAP programming stacks and non-SAP domains and non-SAP tools. In non-SAP text too. So even when it comes to something like Hadoop, or it comes to Python, or it comes to Java, most of their projects tend to be maintenance projects. So even Java developers and Python developers usually are working on some sort of maintenance project or there. They rarely are developing and building new applications from scratch. So Infi, I mean, we are sidetracking a little over here, but Infi isn't a great place to work anyway. It's a pretty shitty company to work at. So, all right. In most companies that have a mix of both AMS as well as implementation work, usually to get assigned to an implementation is a sign of good performance, because like I explained earlier, implementations demand better business process knowledge, better client handling and consulting skills, as well as better technical skills compared to what AMS projects require. So let me briefly talk about now. Let me talk about my previous work. Let me talk about the previous experience that I have before coming to Infosys. So I first joined SAP. Uh, Let me talk about my previous experience. I joined or I started. Let me talk about my previous experience. I started my SAP career with a company called Intelligence in Hyderabad. I started working in 2013. So within 3 months of working on this project, I was put on. I was put in an implementation within 3 months after working on this project as a fresher. And like I mentioned earlier, getting an implementation is a sign of performing well. There were other employees with similar levels of experience who weren't put on any implementation projects. And there were also employees who were put on an implementation for one project, but because their performance on that project was bad, once that project got over, they weren't assigned to any more implementations and they were assigned to EDI projects. So it wasn't that there weren't any other freshers, but relative to many of my peers and say colleagues at that time, I was doing quite well. Not to put anyone else down, but I was doing quite well at that time. Based on the performance of that I did, based on my performance in this first implementation, I was then assigned to another implementation project once the first project got over. Uh, in my first year of Infosys, I got excellent reviews. I got a promotion also in the first year. So at Intelligence, sorry, the job levels are there. At least when I used to work, they started at level L0, then went up to L1, L2, L3, L4, and so on. So in my first year itself, I got a promotion from L0 to L1, and my salary increased from 3.6 lakhs per annum to 5.8 lakhs per annum. Then based on my performance in the second implementation project that I was working on, I was assigned to a third implementation project, and I again got excellent reviews over here too. I got a second promotion in the second year of my work. I went from level L1 to L2, and my salary increased from 5.8 lakhs per annum to 6.8 lakhs per annum in 2 years. There were other senior consultants with 7-8 years of experience who were working in the same company as I was and who were also at the same L2 level. And me in less than 2 years was at L2 level 2. So again, not to put anyone else down, but just trying to talk about my performance and the kind of feedback I got at my earlier companies. I was often appreciated by the MD and CEO to have beaten expectations, and I was also appreciated by many senior colleagues for having a focused desire to learn. I was also called a very good salesman, and in the company, they would jokingly say that I could sell ice to an Eskimo. Once I left Intelligence, I learned ABAP, and I got an SAP certification in SD2. So I currently know ABAP quite well, especially core ABAP. Uh, at the next company I worked for was Bosch. At Bosch, let me just briefly tell you about how they hire and the kind of hiring that goes on at Bosch. So at Bosch, they have a lot of externals. So these are employees who are not on the payrolls of Bosch, but they're on the payrolls of another third-party vendor, and they work on Bosch projects. So at Bosch, I don't have official numbers, but somewhere close to 30 to 40% of all employees working on Bosch projects are externals. And for some reason, at that time, somewhere in 2016, Bosch had made some decision to hire a lot of externals and not take a lot of permanent people. Again, I am not sure about what their policy is with regards to this, but uh, there were a lot of externals at Bosch at that time. Uh, Becoming permanent at Bosch at that time was pretty hard, and usually employees whose performance is not good, what they do is that, and I know of an employee who was similar to me. He was also on a contract at Bosch, and then once the contract expired, they just didn't renew the contract, so they let that employee go. And also there was another employee whose performance was okay. They didn't make them permanent, and they continued extending their contract. So and in addition to that, they were becoming permanent at Bosch at that time was somewhat tough. So as soon as I joined Bosch, I was immediately put on an implementation project over there, and based on my internal interview at Bosch, there were two other developers on my project who were very good performers, and they were on that project since a while. So, and by performers, I mean not my review solely of their performance, the project manager's review of their performance. They weren't made permanent. So, in such a time where becoming permanent was hard, and these other developers were not made permanent, I was made permanent. I was made permanent at Bosch, and then on that project, I started working on ABAP too. I developed one custom object on my own over there, and I started working and working independently in ABAP. So no one's help, no nothing. I would only write my own FS. I would write my own TS. I would develop my own object, and it cleared testing, and it was deployed in production, and the users were happy with that too. I got excellent reviews from my first project manager. Um, he said how he also mentioned during once when I was talking to him how that relative to how much knowledge I have and my knowledge levels, I make a relatively low salary, and this is what he said. And the customers were there were happy with my performance too, and at one point they were ready to hire me on their payrolls. Again, the payroll thing wasn't a hard offer letter that they gave, but it the based on the work that I did over there and based on my performance over there, those the customers were quite happy with my performance, and they were I would have got a job over there. They were almost ready to hire me over there. Yeah. The new project manager in that company also gave very good feedback on my skills and knowledge. He also told me that in one of the performance review sessions where that because I have consulting skills, I have been made permanent in the company. And he contrasted that with another employee who didn't have these consulting skills, and hence that employee wasn't made permanent. And when this new project manager was about to leave the project and go to another project, he offered me to be the project manager full time, not part time or something. And he also mentioned clearly that in terms of skills and knowledge, I was the senior most employee on that project. So he did also have good things to say about my skill and knowledge levels. Uh, then before I come to Infosys, let me also talk about how I worked as an SD trainer at a training institute in Pune. Somewhere in 2018, I started working as SD trainer in Pune. This was while I was working in Infosys, by the way. So on the weekends, I would go and work as a SD trainer in an institute here. The person who owned that institute, he was an FI consultant. His feedback of my knowledge was that my SD knowledge was quite strong. So even that person's feedback about my SD knowledge was that it is quite strong. Now let me come to Infosys. At Infosys, the projects, again, like I mentioned earlier, are mostly AMS projects and support projects, and the scope of work is pretty poor. So the kind of work that is there at Infosys is very pathetic in scope. Uh, so there isn't a lot of work to do fundamentally in Infosys, and a lot of Infosys project managers, their view of every employee is that that they're that they too are similar to every other Infosys employee, as in their work X is also primarily composed of working on support projects or AMS projects. So that's how Infi project managers often think of every other employee, that this employee has only worked on, they have started their career on some AMS project, or their view of every other employee is that they have started their work working on AMS projects. So in my first project at Infosys, the manager over there gave me feedback that I was a team player, and other than receiving feedback that I need fewer follow-ups, and I should not procrastinate as much, and I should deliver work without requiring many follow-ups. As such, I didn't receive any negative feedback about my skill and knowledge levels being inadequate or lagging in some way. On the second projects, one of the other managers gave me feedback that I have a focused desire to learn. So again, similar to whatever feedback I received at Itallians and every other company I worked for, uh, and I also spoke to a lot of ex-colleagues of mine and asked them for feedback, and all of them have said, I mean, many of them have often said that I have this desire to learn and I'm always seeking to learn new things. So that's again not true that, uh, yeah. And before I became the SD consultant on my on the project at Infosys, there was another SD consultant before me who had 8 or 9 years experience in SAP, and about 2 to 3 years experience working in the domain, and about 10 to 12 years overall experience. So this guy was the SD consultant before. He was the SD consultant on this project before I was. Uh, a total of 4 SD consultants have come and worked on this particular project in a period of 2.5 years or 3 years. So that amount of churn also shows you, for example, how that kind, what kind of project it is. And none of these people left because of poor performance. It's not that the first person was thrown away because he was a poor performer, and the second person was thrown away because he was a poor performer. I was thrown away because I was a poor performer, and the fourth person is being thrown away because of a poor performer. In all 4 cases, if it is a combination of a lack of on-site opportunities and a lack of good work and even growth in the company. So if so many, if 4 people have changed the same project in a matter of three years, that also shows you how that project is fundamentally not a good place to work one day. So okay, so that's about this part. There was another senior FI consultant when I was working with there, and that FI consultant, he later went on to become the head of BI in this company. Um, when I asked him for feedback on my SAP SD knowledge and skill levels, he said that I know more SD than that previous SD consultant with who had 10 to 12 years experience overall. So that was his feedback about my SD knowledge and skill levels. Uh, I also asked the client, who is an SAP consultant himself, on his feedback on my knowledge levels. He told me that the scope of work on this project is very low, so he doesn't really know my SD knowledge levels, and he couldn't really assess my knowledge levels accurately. So in addition to that, in 2020, I got 2 offer letters from 2 different companies. The interviews of both companies were incidentally quite were harder than Infosys. The if the difficulty level of the interview at Infosys was 3 out of 10, the difficulty of the interview at the 2 other companies was 6 out of 10. So the interview duration was longer too. In the first company, there were 2 rounds. The first round was about 1 hour, and the second round was about half an hour face to face. And the second company, the interview was one 45-minute interview. So both these interviews were both more difficult in terms of the questions asked. They asked more questions, and the length of the interview was longer too. It was they covered a lot more topics than Infosys covered in their interview. So they were even clearing these interviews and getting these job offers is somewhat of a sign of good performance and good knowledge levels only. Companies wouldn't give offers unless knowledge levels were that poor and all. So now coming to the feedback of the project manager at Infosys, the project manager, वो तू होगा That's how we must be speaking. The project manager at Infosys said that my SAP SD knowledge levels are very low for someone with 5 to 6 years experience in SD. He said in Hindi कि बहुत पीछे चल रहे हो तुम, बहुत पीछे चल रहे हो, बहुत यानी बहुत ज़्यादा. He would often imply that whatever customizations which I worked on, I think that that customization is what SAP is. So, for example, if there is a custom output for a particular invoice which is triggered, the custom configuration or the customization done for that particular invoice output type is what I would think SAP is. That was his feedback. He told me that I need to brush up my SD knowledge since my SD knowledge is almost non-existent. This was the feedback he gave. So as I went through earlier, this feedback was grossly incorrect, and one of the main reasons why I left Infosys. In that's not my. In addition to it, the work at Infosys was very poor in scope. So this combination of how both the manager has this incorrect assessment and feedback, plus how the work is very rubbish, and the work at Infosys is very pathetic and very poor in scope, are the two reasons why I left Infosys. In another video, I have talked about my review of Infosys, and over there I talk about more about the overall how Infosys is a company to work at, um, how its work is, how the culture is, how the salary compensation benefits are, and what its other policies are like, and generally my overall experience of working in the company too. So this is the reason why I left Infosys. Hope this video is helpful to whoever watches it. Thanks and bye.